I don't know how you expect me to preach after that. Come on. I got to write myself a note. Yeah, help her, Jesus. I've been sitting there during worship like, Jesus, help me. I feel this word today. I think I feel the weight of it because it's something that's really convicting me, and so I just pray that it has, that it reaches your heart and whatever God wants to do. Around 1910, a man named William Booth, who you may know as the man who started the Salvation Army. Anyone heard of the Salvation Army? Yep. So he began the corporation, the Salvation Army, and he would send out different missionaries to different areas. And he sent out two women, Kate and Mary Jackson, to Leeds, England, which is a little town outside of London. And these two women would work tirelessly day in and day out, just trying to reach these people. And after many, I don't know how long they were there, but after a long, long time of them just tirelessly working into the night, just working themselves to the bone, they eventually sent a telegraph to William Booth, and they said, please, we are just not seeing any fruit here. We're not making any impact. Will you please move us to another station? And a little while later, a telegraph came back from William Booth, and it just had two words. He said, try tears. Try tears. And so these women knew what he meant, and they started to just cry out to God for the salvation of the people in that town. Their hearts started to break for these people that needed God, and they didn't even know it. And a massive revival started, and they ended up having a church, the largest church outside of London, from these two women, and it all changed with those two words. Try tears. I think we could all learn a little something from Linda. Keeping our hearts sensitive, right? Keeping our hearts sensitive to what God's doing and crying the tears of heaven. And that doesn't necessarily mean always in heartbreak, but it often does mean in heartbreak. It often does mean in looking at people in struggle and in pain and in need and seeing the Father's heart. I want you, if you take notes, or even if you don't, I want you to write down those words because I believe they're deeply important. Try tears. I believe these are words to live by. And that might sound, honestly, as I say it even, it might sound opposite to the message that I often preach. My message is often one of, come on, victory, let's go. Like, we could change the world. Let's do this. And so all of a sudden saying, you know, this is one of the most important messages is try tears might feel opposite to that, but I actually believe that it's not. It's just a really important ingredient to seeing victory come. I believe it's really, really important that we keep our hearts sensitive to what God is doing. Delia, I love what you just shared about the seeds, and Ella, I think, I don't know where you are now, but right there, hi. This is Ella, who's sang with us today. She's part of our youth group, yeah. But how you guys shared about seeds, the seeds that are being planted. And in Psalm 126, verses 5 and 6, it says this: those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seeds to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them. Right? As we plant these seeds that God gives us, these seeds of hope, seeds of salvation, seeds of world-changing transformation, I believe it's the tears from heaven that actually help them grow. And then we come with joy, right? And just a few weeks ago, I shared a message of how important joy is. And here I am sharing the message of how important tears are. And again, it can feel opposite, but I actually believe that both of those things are necessary all the time. And that's why we call today's message the space between. What do we do with the space between the things that we know are true, the victory we know that Jesus already won, and then the times where we're not seeing it manifest. One of the songs we sang, I wrote down the words, it says, knowing the battle's won, but waiting for change to come. Right? We know the battle is won. We know the victory is ours, but we still live in the tension of the space between. When it comes to souls, there is no reaping without weeping. I heard that this week. When it comes to people's souls, why do people need to be saved? Because there's hopelessness without salvation in Jesus Christ. And we have to meet them in the hopelessness, right? Why do people need victory? Well, because they're in defeat. Why does the world need to be changed? Because it's not the way it's meant to be. And sometimes we go, I'm convicted of this, that I jump so far to the victory that I miss out on why we even need victory to begin with. Does that make sense? Yeah. Kate and Mary, not to be confused with Mary Kate, the twin, but Kate and Mary Jackson, the missionaries. The whole week I kept like, no, it's not Mary Kate, it's Kate and Mary. Kate and Mary allowed their heartbreak for people to be bigger than their mission. So often we can get so focused on our mission, right? The thing that God's called us to do, that we miss out, we lose track of the heart behind it. We lose track of the God who's going, I need you to reach these people because my heart is breaking for the fact that they don't know me. Yeah. Kate and Mary learned to lean into the heartbreak. And because they leaned into the heartbreak, because they tried tears, they were then able to carry the heart of God to the people. And it was only when they leaned into that heartbreak that they were actually able to grab hold of his heart for the people. On Monday morning, I heard this story. It was the first thing I woke up to after the Love event. And again, thank you so much to everybody. It's amazing. 102,000 is so far what's come in, and there's other people who have said that, are still sending checks. We did get 3 different people had a word for 200,000, so I am living in the space between. Where's the other 98,000 coming from? Because we believe it's coming. But honestly, 102,000 is as good. It's better than we've done almost every year. There's only one year that we did better than that. So we're just so excited about that. But I woke up on Monday morning, and you know how sometimes after like a huge event or something that you've been really working hard on, you just kind of crash? Anyone ever have that experience? That was me. I crashed. And I woke up to this message, but God really convicted my heart. He convicted my heart that sometimes I've been so big on the where we're going that I forget why we're going there. I forget to try tears. And specifically for me, when I was thinking about those kids, I realized I needed to get back to the root of why we're doing this. Yes, it's because we believe they can change nations. Yes, we believe that these kids are the chosen ones. Yes, we hear the stories of the miracles and we want more. But we also have to remember the pain and the reason that we do this. Now, does that mean, as I got convicted, that I have too much hope? No. I don't think there's ever too much hope. I think hope is our home. Hope is where we should live with Jesus, right? When we have Jesus, there's never too much hope. Never, ever, ever too much hope, right? So we have to stay in full hope while at the same time living in the tension of the pain. Does that make sense? Don't get me wrong. Hope is vital. Joy is vital. We have to, Jesus does not mince words when he's telling us, always rejoice. Always rejoice. Always have hope. We have a living hope that we live in. But as we look at Kate and Mary, it said that they began not just praying, but having travailing prayers. And I looked up that word because I thought I knew what it meant, but I was like, okay, what does it really mean? And it's like to really just put your whole heart, your whole effort to actually just pour out everything that's within you out. Jeremiah 8:21. Jeremiah said, I hurt with the hurt of my people. I mourn and I am overcome with grief. I was thinking about the fact that Graham came last week, and he shared here in church, and then at the end, we just felt like we were supposed to pray for him. So much like you just prayed for Cody and I like what Caleb said, prayer turned to prophecy real quick. I love that, because why? Because we're praying out of the heart of God. Like, God, what are you saying? And that time was so impactful for Graham. He kept bringing it up the rest of the week. He's like, man, just the things that you guys said, and we actually need to get that clip and send it to him. But he just was so impacted by that. And then he spoke later in the week. We met with a few different people, and he's like, man, it's amazing to think that I had to come halfway across the world to receive the encouragement that I so desperately needed. We sat with Sandy one night, and he was sharing a lot of just the really hard things. I mean, they've been facing, he spoke a little bit about it in church last week, but the things that they've had to go through with kids, like going and the witchcraft that a lot of them are involved in, and their families don't even know. It's just part of life. It's not like they're trying to do something bad. But these kids are coming back, and they're manifesting, and they're just having all these really really terrible things happen. And Graham and Tammy have had to kind of get a fast course direct from heaven in how to do deliverance, because as they reached out for help, no one was there to help them. And as we sat with Sandy afterwards, Graham just said, man, it's so encouraging to sit with people who actually don't look at me like I'm crazy, right? But anyway, I'm kind of on a tangent here, but I was thinking about that, about how we were able to just pour in to Graham. And my heart started to break, because I thought, the reason that we want to reach our community is not because we want a bigger church, because we want to be the cool church that, reaches out and loves people. Yeah, of course, that's all great. But my heart breaks and longs for people to hear the voice of God over their life. My heart breaks and longs for every person to come into a place like this and have people surround them and say, this is what the Lord says about you. Because many have never heard what he says about them. Right? That's what it means to try tears. It's to go, we're not just out there to do a mission. We are out there because the mission is to bring the actual King of Kings into our city, into our community. It's for us to bring the heart of God to a people that we love and we care about, and our heart breaks because they don't know him yet. That's what it means to try tears. Joelle and I have been read a book a little while ago by Benny Johnson called The Happy Intercessor. And in that book, Benny speaks a lot about how she never really wanted to be an intercessor because a lot of the intercessors she knew were really depressed. Anyone ever experienced that? Intercessors, people who are just spend their life in prayer, can end up so depressed and discouraged. Why? Because they're constantly they're coming to God with the pain of the world. But God started to speak to Benny and said, I want you to be a happy intercessor. And this is how she defines intercession. She says to capture the heartbeat of heaven and declare or pray into this world. Intercession is true agreement with heaven. And she goes yes, I see the pain. And she would go to places. She would take trips with friends as God would highlight different places or people groups or whatever. And she would go and she would sit and cry for these people. But then she would always bring the hope of heaven. She would always pray in accordance with agreement with heaven, which is victory, right? But I think sometimes we want to jump to the victory before we actually feel the pain. It means we don't ignore the pain. It means we pick up the pain and we bring it to him. We pick up the people who need him and we bring them to him. We look at our family members that we so badly long for salvation for them, and we allow ourselves to shed a tear over the fact that they don't know him yet. We look at places like Lily of the Valley and we go, wow, there's so much good being done there. but my heart breaks for the kids who have gone through so much, or for the kids who aren't there yet, right? We embrace the pain at the same time as we embrace the promise. I don't know why I can't say that. We embrace the pain at the same time as we embrace the promise. Benny went on to say in this book, we are on the offensive team. If you don't understand that, if you are praying from a place of victory, if you are not praying from a place of victory, then you will become an intercessor whose prayer life is marked with defeat. If we are not praying from a place of victory, then our intercession, our prayers will be marked with defeat. The truth is that we carry the hope of heaven. And when we allow ourselves our hearts to break over the people, it doesn't mean we lose hope. It means we step into that place with our hope and we bring them back. We bring them to this place of hope. Who needs hope? The heartbroken. When I first read what Benny wrote there about we are on the offensive team, I read it as the offensive team. And then God was like, yeah, a lot of Christians think they're on the offensive team. We're offended and we're offending. And we're much more interested in focusing on what we're offended by in the world. And we often go and we offend the world, which sometimes is inevitable. But sometimes I think too many Christians do it on purpose. But I want to make sure that we see that we are not on the offended and offending team. We are on the offensive team, meaning we are on the team that is advancing, not retreating. We are not, I think way too many of us are sitting here, and when we go to that place of heartbreak, we suddenly think that we're in a defensive mode, trying to stop the enemy's attacks on all of this pain of the world. But instead, what we need to remember is that we are the ones who are advancing, but that doesn't mean that we're running off ahead by ourselves. It means that we are the ones who are going back here, and as we allow ourselves to cry and let our hearts break, and feel the pain, that is actually us tapping into the heart of God. There's that song, I forget what the name of it is, but it says, break my heart for what breaks yours. I think that's a beautiful prayer for us to pray every day. God, break my heart for what breaks yours. Not so that I live in defeat, but so that I can go and recognize that as I am on the offensive team, I actually get to come into that heartbreak situation and bring the hope of heaven. I actually get to be the one who says, there is hope, and his name is Jesus. Many of you guys will know this story in John chapter 11 where Jesus goes and his friend Lazarus has died, and I'm just going to read little parts of it. In verse 4 it says, so they were sent, some people sent the message to Jesus saying that Lazarus was sick. And it says, when he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death, for it is for God's glory that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed there where he was for 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. And right before that it said he loved Martha. He loved her sister. He loved Lazarus. So he stayed where he was when he found out they were sick. We often rush into problems instead of waiting on God's timing. We see tragedy, we see, hard things happen in life, and we think that our job is to jump up and jump into the urgency that somebody else is feeling. But the way that Jesus does it is he goes, I really care for them. Man, I love these people, and they're sick. I'm going to stay right here for 2 more days. I'm not going to make this emergency my emergency. I'm going to wait on God's timing instead, because Jesus says, I never do anything without first looking at what the Father's doing. So in that moment, the Father was not saying go, he was saying stay. And so that's exactly what Jesus did. And it didn't mean he didn't care. It says right there he cared. But he cared enough to do it in God's timing. And so often I think we think that caring means jumping the moment somebody says jump, and instead it should be stop, pray, take a moment, ask for wisdom. God, is the best thing for me to run into this right now? Is the best thing for me to stay in your presence right now? Because most of the time when we react, we end up doing stupid things, right? I found that. Every time I react to something, I panic, I stress, and it never makes it better. It always makes it worse. And so actually caring often means stop, pray, see what the Father is doing. Then we jump a little bit. Jesus ends up going with his disciples, and in verse 14, he kind of said, hey, so they're sleeping, Lazarus is sleeping, and they're getting confused, and so he ends up just saying to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So he goes, and everybody's upset, and everybody's weeping and wailing, and I find it interesting, though. Jesus doesn't rush in and go, hey, wait, there's more. Stop, you guys are about to see the greatest miracle you've ever seen. That would be me. I'd be like, okay, if I knew this was about to happen, I'd be like, draw the crowds, let's go, come on, everybody, like, stop crying. You guys are pathetic, you don't believe me, come on, right? He doesn't do that. In verse 33, it says, when Jesus saw Lazarus' sisters weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. He knew what was coming, and yet he was deeply moved and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And Jesus wept. Jesus wept. Jesus didn't ignore the pain, knowing what was about to happen. He was present in that moment. He didn't gather everybody around and try to make a big fuss of, look what I'm going to do, everybody. He was just with them in that moment. And I think this is the lesson that William Booth was trying to teach, is you ladies carry the hope of the world, but I need you to sit in the pain with the people. Because the only way that that hope can come is when you're willing to actually feel my heart for them. Willing to feel why I went to the cross for them. Willing to allow your heart to break and to mourn for them. He was present in the moment. He sat with them in their pain. I believe that tears tether us to the heart of God. When we might want to run forward with the solution, and we have it, and we're excited, and yes, like that's so me, as I'm like, let's go, let's do this, right? But tears tethers us to the why behind it. That this is so much more than just a mission. This is the heartbeat of a good father for his children, crying out, saying, I know how much you need me. I don't like pain. Any kind of pain. Like physical pain, definitely not. But like emotional pain, I will do anything to avoid it. Anything to avoid it. I don't want to deal with it. But as I read this story on Monday morning, God took me back to 2007. It was the second mission trip, I think, second or third trip that we had taken to Lily, and it was just Cody and I and 3 other people. And something crazy happened that should not have ever happened. We somehow were given binders full of the case files of the children. And I really, to this day, don't know how that happened. But we sat And we read through these stories, and I'm not going to share them because I can't get them out of my head, and I don't want you to be stuck with them either. But the pain that these kids had gone through. And that shifted our lives. You see, the hope had pulled us into this mission. But the hurt is what helped us to put down the roots and stay. Seeing that these kids who had gone through so much were now smiling and running and begging us for chocolate. Suddenly we saw them in a new light. Suddenly we saw the heart of heaven in these kids who had gone through so much. And when God reminded me on Monday to try tears, it wasn't hard. I've cried many, many tears. Again and again. But I do rush quickly out of the pain. And he just reminded me that we have to hold in tension the pain of this world in order to see his promises come. We have to hold in tension his heart, his heartbeat, what breaks his heart in order to see the promises come. We see the kids who, Graham put up on the screen, for those of you who were there last week, he put up, 24 different young adults who, some are becoming doctors and lawyers and, all different kinds of professions, and these kids who came from nothing. And we look at that, and we look at that hope, and then we hold in tension where they've come from and the ones who are still struggling. You see, in the moment where Jesus wept, he embraced his humanity. He embraced the part of him that said, this is not the way it was meant to be. He allowed himself to grieve because he saw that this is not the way it was meant to be. The human experience involves pain, but the Christian experience involves a living hope. Right? A living hope that we can look at that pain and go, I will not get stuck there. Because my God is the God who then weeps with us but turns around, and he, from that pain, brings the most powerful demonstration of who he was as he brought Lazarus out of the grave. Right? And Lazarus comes out. My dad always used to say, we kind of think like, oh, it's such a nice thing, but it's like he was probably wrapped in grave clothes. And in the NIV, not the NIV, the New King James Version, it probably says he stinketh. And he hops out in his grave clothes, and they have to take all of the, can you imagine that sight? Can you imagine that? But in that moment, you see God for who he is. That he is the God who cries with us. And then he is the God who brings us to life. He's the God who is in our pain with us, and he asks us to be in the pain that we see around us. But then he says, but you never live in that pain. You always stand up and bring those people into the promise, right? He didn't allow the power that was about to come to stop him from experiencing the pain that was coming. So my question to you today is, who do you need to try tears for? And again, it's super easy for us right now. Everyone's super quiet right now and feeling the weight of it. And it can be really easy for us to become those ones who live in defeat. I think that's why we're so afraid of tears. Because we're scared we're going to stay there. But we are not going to stay there because we have the God of living hope living inside of us. But who do you need to try tears for in your life? Is it a neighbor? Is it a family member? Is it a people group? Is there a tragedy that you see in the world that God's saying, hi, I want you to try tears? Because what happened when those ladies tried tears? Revival came. Their tears watered the seed that had already been planted. They had already done the work. They had already sowed the seeds. And their tears, their heartbreak for the people is what God used to bless and to grow the revival that came. And we don't even know how many thousands were saved and have been saved since that moment, being the largest church outside of London. Who do you need to try tears for? Many of you know Isaiah chapter 6 because it's an amazing, amazing part of Scripture where Isaiah brings us into the throne room of heaven. But what's really interesting is as it starts, Isaiah says, in the year the King Uzziah died. And we can read past that and just go, oh, it's a timestamp. He's just letting us know in the year that the king died. But what we don't actually know, unless we've studied into history, is that Isaiah the prophet and Uzziah the king were probably cousins. They grew up together. That's why Isaiah the prophet not only had all this access to the temple, but he also had access to the palace. And he worked with a lot of the kings because they were family. And so Isaiah and Uzziah had actually grown up together. So as he writes those words, in the year the king Uzziah died, for him that held a weight. But isn't it so amazing that so often it's out of the pain, out of the worst pains of our life, that the biggest breakthrough can come? It was in that year of Isaiah's pain, and he had watched Uzziah the king actually just really fail in the end of his life. And that was heartbreaking too. And it's in that pain that the prophet Isaiah gets to see have the most amazing encounter in the throne room of heaven. But then what's crazy is, he has this amazing encounter, and we've talked about this several times, and he sees, he's like so undone as he's like watching how holy God is. And in that moment, like he says, I'm unclean, and this angel comes and puts the coal on his lips, and then the Lord says, hey, I have this message. Who's going to go? Whom can I send? And Isaiah goes, here I am, send me. But has anyone ever read what the message was? It's not nice. The message in Isaiah 6, not nice. Up until the very, very end. The whole message is like, all this destruction is going to come. All of these terrible things are going to come. And this, like, the people are going to be, just go through all of these struggles because of their sinfulness. But then right at the end, in chapter 6, verse 13, it says, and though a tenth remains in the land, it will again be laid to waste. But as the terebinth and oak leaf stumps, when they are cut down, so the holy seed will be the stump in the land. And what this is saying, and it may not make a whole lot of sense, but he's saying, like, these trees, these mighty oaks are going to be cut down, but there is seed in the stump. But there is a seed in the stump. And we know that seed ends up being Jesus, who is our living hope. We know that through the pain of this earth, we get to carry a message of hope, but it is through the stump that has been cut down that a seed comes. And I was reminded of this story a few weeks ago, and our family actually has like a firsthand account of this, because in the fires at the end of 2018, my parents' backyard was burnt. Our neighbor's house was burnt down, and their backyard, that used to be a jacuzzi. And this whole deck that my dad had built, and this tree in the top left corner, as they came in to clear out, there were that tree and a few others that they just said, you know what, these trees are dead. They were burnt, like hollowed out, burnt. And so they said, we have to cut them down. And so they did. They came and cut them all down. But that particular tree, my mom was really not happy that they were cutting it down because she loved it. And so they cut this tree down, and it was just to a stump. And then what we started to notice was like these little sprouts started to come out of the stump. And so at first the gardener would show up and he would just like cut it down again. And then by the next week, it was like rapid pace growing. And so you see that, like, that's the dark stump. And then look at that massive branch that's coming out of it. And now that one, you can't even tell the size of it. Like this little thing in the bottom corner is this little pot that big. It is now, I don't know, 30 feet in the air. Yeah, like this thing just keeps growing and growing and growing. Out of the stump that has been burned and cut down, new life keeps coming. And I believe that's the message that we carry. That in this life, there are so many people who have been cut down. Many times we've been cut down. But Jesus is saying, I want you to take the message that out of the stump, out of the pain, out of the struggle, will come a seed that will grow and you won't be able to stop it. I know the message today has been heavy, but I hope it's also one of hope. I hope it's one that says, as we actually tap into the heart of God, we get to experience the heartbreak, but better than that and more than that, we get to take his hope, the hope of the world, to the world. We get to look at our city and go, man, we want to see the city transformed, not because that's our mission, but because that's the heart of God. We want to see our city transformed, not because that's a cool thing to say as a church, but because we see a people who desperately need to hear the voice of God for themselves. I long for the day where every single person in our city gets to hear what God says about them, and that we get to be carriers of that hope, right? We right now, like that's not a long time. That's right now. You get to go be carriers of the hope of heaven to the people around you. So who are the people that Jesus is calling you to try tears for? God, we love you. God, we love your heart. We love your heart. God, we love the fact that you just care so deeply for people. God, you care so deeply for people who want nothing to do with you. You care so deeply for people who are so lost in sin and junk and evil, and yet you still see who you created them to be. And God, we just pray that you would give us that heart. That you would give us that heart for people. That you would give us that heart for the world, God. We truly believe that you have called us not only to the city, but to nations. God, we see your heart in South Africa with those kids, in Zimbabwe, in Mexico, at Casa Hogar, God, at all these different places that you have tethered our hearts to. God, we pray that you would break our heart for what breaks yours. But God, we also know that you are the one who binds us together. You comfort those who are heartbroken. You bind our hearts together. So Jesus, will you help us to be your hope for this world? God, will you help us, God, to carry this message of hope, to not get discouraged? Lord, I just right now pray and release over every one of us the heart that Graham and Tammy have, that they can see some of the most devastating situations, and yet they walk in your peace and your abundance and your promise. So God, will you just pour out that over us, the hope of heaven, and that we won't be afraid of tears, because that's where you are, weeping with those who weep and mourning with those who mourn, and then picking them up and leading them to victory. Jesus, we want to be your hands and feet in this world. We love you. Amen.